we're trying to bring some things to you from a biblical but counselor perspective as well. And again, I want to say thank you to our elders for letting us do that. Yes. And especially in this kind of weird format where we're not used to kind of a discussion with two people leading the discussion. So, but Joe, if can you get my PowerPoint up, please? We've been talking about boundaries, but shifting the idea of boundaries from putting boundaries on others or using boundaries to try to control others to thinking about boundaries in how they define who I am and how I choose to show up in relationships and in what we refer to as systems, right? And systems are just the interactions of people, the family system, the congregational system, right? It's just that interaction of more than one person. And so we talked about the defining of self and this focus on my boundaries, what I will do, what I will not do, that kind of thing. And we talked about how important that is then as we move into the marriage and there's an intimacy that's there, and there's the building of a life together. There's a two becoming one, and so there is a negotiation now of boundaries.
That was our word.
And it doesn't need to go so much that we lose ourselves completely, but it also needs to happen enough to where two do become one.
That's right.
Right? And so there's that tension that needs to be there. Your MasterCard logo.
There we go.
That's what we talked about. And tonight, we want to talk about, so we're just kind of taking these circles, right, and broadening them. So we've got the boundaries that define me, the boundaries that define us, the boundaries that define family. And so we want to talk tonight about the kinds of boundaries that protect and promote health in all members of the family. I think you kind of wanted to put this in a particular biblical frame.
I believe we have to, in talking the way that Timothy was sent back to Ephesus, but where Paul had spent a lot of time with those elders. He knew that congregation very, very well, and he spoke to them in the letter of Ephesians in that familiar tone, and even used words in there that are very specific to those that you're comfortable with. And in the letter to Timothy, as he's talking to Timothy specifically about his work there, and if you look at chapter 5 and verse 8, you'll find that he says, "He that provides not for his own is worse than the infidel." And the word "provide" there, perhaps in our language, in the Old English, it might be misleading. And so I wanted to be sure that we get this in the right perspective tonight, so that our point of view is where it needs to be, because the word "provide" there, pronieo, it's something that is more of a concept, a lot like Koine Greek does. And pronieo, it doesn't exactly mean provide. We may think, well, provide, I provide a good living, I provide a good roof over their heads. They're able to do this and do that, have this, have that. Well, that's not necessarily what pronieo means. It means to consider, but that's neo, but pro, to consider beforehand. And that's what that word actually means. So when we talk about to provide, and to realize that we are to consider all the needs beforehand, we're finally getting what that verse means. And so that's what he is striving to tell Timothy. And that's where we want to make sure tonight is in the light of that very thought. To look at beforehand, to consider before it's needed. And that's where we're at. Even though our key word is still negotiation, our key word in here is knowing the family system. And no, we're not going to talk about Bowen per se, but it's going to be part of who we are and the way that we talk with the families that come to us for help. But also in this negotiation, the word that you used a minute ago is one that's going to be a central word, and that is tension. When we think about tension, is that positive or negative? Somebody's got to say something. We think of tension, we think of negative, right? Yeah. But when we think about the way we're going to look at growth and the way that we're going to look at what it means to negotiate, there is tension. There's always tension. I really enjoy going to flea markets and yard sales because I like to find a good deal. And there's one rule in making the deal. You never give what they're asking. And that makes my wife so nervous.
Or in your case, you just never give anything. You just
it's all about
pass on
the
everything.
Why am I his friend? You know, as much as trouble as he gives me, you know what I mean? He just hassles me all the time.
Well, we have to illustrate tension.
That's true. We're illustrating it right here. So as we think about this tonight, in all seriousness, as we look into what we're going to bring up to you in these boundaries, tonight is going to be about that tension that helps us to seek negotiation and find balance. That's what we're going to talk about.
So when last night you talked about us, and you talked about kind of these elements that are considered when it comes to my identity, and you talked about our memories that we bring, our experiences,
right,
our past relationships, and that doesn't just mean past
love relationships.
Right.
It's not
right.
that. It's all of them.
And our values.
And past value. That's right. Past and current value.
And so we think about the negotiation of values when two people come together from different perspectives of those things, right? And in particular, one of the things that popped out to me is that the experiences piece, because it is in response to a lot of experiences that we end up growing. Like that's the context for growth.
That's the compare-contrast.
And in the maturation process of growing up, there are two things outside of the typical adolescence development, right, that moves you along. There are two things that I think really are the catalyst for maturation.
All right, what are they?
One of them is getting married. Now, obviously, there has to be a level of maturity in place for two people to latch themselves to one another.
But these women in here would say that the man that they married was still a boy. Any of y'all would say that what are y'all grinning about? Y'all going to grin all night tonight. I can tell you right now, you're going to grin all night long. So yeah, there has to be a level of maturity.
But there's nothing like the responsibility of marriage. There's nothing like taking that commitment, and starting this journey together that will push you to man up. Okay?
When we've always said you cannot put into words the feelings, the thoughts, the sheer emotions of looking at your firstborn child when you hold them that first moment. You can't put that into words.
And so that was the second one, is when you have your first child.
Have children.
Yeah. Because and maybe it's not so much marriage itself or that first child itself, but it is the choosing to take on that level of responsibility. Right? It is responsibility. It's putting that stuff on your shoulders that is one of or a couple of life's biggest experiences to demand growth. Right?
Yes.
You really start thinking about your earning potential growing. But like you pointed out, you're thinking about beforehand, right? You're thinking beforehand. What needs to be in place?
Yes.
For this family to grow, and for this family to be safe, and this family to be protected, and this family to be, and these kids to be healthy, right? And so you start feeling that responsibility, and working to make those things
to provide
happen.
You're wanting to prepare to provide. Okay, I see that.
So
outside of when I'm going to obey the gospel, are we saying that this is one of, if not the single most important boundary to be set?
Yeah, I think so.
I don't think these folks would disagree with that.
And we could talk about horror stories, right?
I'm sure we could.
Where the boundaries weren't put in place.
I'm sure we could.
Yeah. But that also comes back to kind of the whole thing we've been reiterating about identity and how it's different from the way the world wants you to think about identity, right? That identity is something that you just need to just look inside yourself and figure out who you are. Like, I don't know, there's like your genetic code in and of itself is going to determine who you are.
That you can read it, yeah.
Or, you're waiting for some kind of inner enlightenment to tell you who you are.
Magical.
Or, no, that's not correct biblically. That's not correct psychologically.
Not at all.
That's just not correct.
No.
The way that identity forms is that it is negotiated.
Tension.
And I'm even talking about, now we're starting to think about the way that I structure my family or set up my family, the boundaries that I put in place.
Okay.
I am creating the environment in which they will begin negotiating an identity. Right?
Yes, because their identity is formed from those experiences that you as a father are setting up in their home.
And so this is what I hate about the I'm gonna get in trouble.
I know.
About the way we try to handle bullying nowadays.
That's a big word today.
With the zero tolerance.
Right.
Like but there is some level of socialization that needs to happen among kids, right? For you to be sort of, don't act like that. That's weird, right? You're weird. You're not going to fit in if you, right? That is because identity is negotiated. Identity is negotiated then in the marriage that we talked about, right? But
yes,
identity is a thing that develops, and it develops in relationship. And it is something that has to be negotiated. So what I want to do when I define my family as the environment that we are growing together,
okay,
is I want to set some of the rules of the negotiation.
Okay. Because we know when the child turns 5, they become self-aware, and that self-awareness is based upon their memories and experiences that we as parents have provided in the first 5 years of their life.
So you mean I don't wait until they're a teenager?
Too late.
Oh. So that's what you mean by that, beforehand?
Beforehand.
Okay. All right. So when we think back to, right, the foundation of the family.
Okay.
And that's what we talked about, the couple, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are... You made this very clear. There are other influences,
mm-hmm.
right?
Unfortunately,
and so there are two systems, at least two systems, that people are currently negotiating.
Everyone in this room, everyone in this room has to have those two.
Right. So in your family, as you think about creating that family and creating the boundaries and the environment in which you are going to develop as a person and your kids are going to develop and so forth, one of the things that is coming to bear is the family that you came out of.
That's who developed who I am and where my boundaries are.
Because if I'm talking about the experiences that my kids are going to have before they're 5 and after they're 5 to form their identity, well, guess what? The experiences that I had
are the ones you're starting with.
Are what I'm beginning and bringing to the table.
Yeah.
So I've got that helped form my initial identity. That grew from that because I had to negotiate other relationships as well.
As you mature.
But now I've got this family that's mine.
Now it's your system.
Now it's my system.
Yes.
And so I'm having to decide how much of my family is going to be like this. What am I going to incorporate? What am I going to leave out? What do I think worked? What didn't work? What?
Yeah.
And so I'm having to negotiate what I'm taking from these two systems that I'm a part of.
I wonder what everybody would say as you in your life have brought things from the first system where you grew up, mom and dad at home, and then the system that you are now in your family with your wife and with your children. What would you say one of the things you did bring over? I'm going to have a little fun with you here. What's one of the things that you bring over into your house? Discipline, okay. You're going to discipline your husband the first week that you're married? I had to pick at you, sorry. Forgive me.
He shook his head yes. He was like, yeah.
He didn't argue, did he? He didn't argue. I'll let you off the hook a little bit with this one. You ready? One of the first things that my clients tell me right after marriage or right before marriage, as they're thinking about beforehand, as their home is going to be, is bedtime. Ooh, I got some eyebrows. I got a lot of eyebrows on that one. What time we're going to go to sleep? Because mom and dad said you're going to be in the bed at 8:30, right? Well, I guess maybe not. Maybe 10, right? But then all of a sudden, we find ourselves, and we're young, and we're energetic, and it's midnight, and then that alarm clock goes off at 5:30 in the morning, and we start breaking alarm clocks. That's the negotiation that we're talking about. Because we're bringing things from one system into our system, and we're having to find out what we want. By the way, that bedtime, that number gets earlier and earlier as you get older, I promise. Okay? All right, go jump ahead. I didn't want to.
So it's interesting that kind of in more extremes, right, where there is a dysfunction, like a significant dysfunction in that system you came from.
You like talking about the negative.
Yeah, that's where I live. No, I don't mean in my family.
Good save.
Okay. So like, for example, people that grow up in a family where there's an alcoholic.
Yes.
Right?
And we know that's reality.
It's interesting how that will kind of either produce one of two extremes. Like somebody will come out of that going, I have seen what it does. I will not touch the stuff. I don't want it anywhere near anything to do with it.
Right.
And some will come out of it and follow that same pattern and bring it forward.
Repeat it.
Yeah.
Repeat the system.
And a lot of that is the difference between being intentional about the new boundaries that I'm going to set versus just sort of autopilot continuing the programming that occurred.
Exactly.
And so the reason why we want to talk about these things is if for no other reason than to just make them not automatic, but make them conscious. Just make them something you think about, right?
Yes, and if they are conscious, then they will not be dysfunctional. If you just allow it to happen, then the world will take you in willy-nilly. So let's talk about this assessment piece, okay? All right, when we say assessment, what do I mean? Somebody. Assessment. Testing. Any other words? He's right. When think about assessments, those of you that are in the school system, you think automatically of tests. When you think about assessing your life, you're assessing the system that you're coming over from one system that was your life, and now you're coming to a system that you are defining. So if you were defining that system, I've got three things that are negatives. We're going to do it his way. We've got three negatives, okay? You ready? Here comes one. Those of you that are taking notes. If you're looking at your system, be inauthentic. Okay? Inauthentic. What's authentic? Real. Okay? Authentic means real. I want to give you a simple illustration here about authenticity. If I am authentic, then if I say that worship begins, what time does worship begin here at East Walker?
Class? 10:30. 9:30 for Bible class and 10:30.
9:30 for Bible study. is when we start. So 9:30 is when we start. And has anybody in here ever been late? Get them up. Okay, good. Now, what about that is inauthentic? Nothing. Life happens, right? When the preacher is late and they start sending out the search parties, it's kind of fun. But unless you're the one they're coming to hunt, right? That has happened. That has happened. So late happens. But inauthenticity in the system shows that I'm late. I'm never here at 9:30. I'm always here at 9:34. Peradventure, 9:45. I'm never here at 9:25. My Popeye said, if you weren't early, you're what? Late. It's a funny thing, because that is a sign of inauthenticity, because your priorities have never shown that time frame, that action that you're professing to be the first priority in your life, it's not. Now, if you're late every now and then, that's just life. Don't forget I said that. But inauthenticity within the system will show up in something that practical. Number two, if I'm finding a negative, I don't want myself to be in a position to where that I'm inconsistent. All right? What is consistent? What is consistent? Give me a word. Steady? The same. Okay, I'm steady, I'm the same. All right, so here's the thing. Have any of you ever had that test in elementary school where the first line says, read all the instructions before you write anything down? You see Rob back there, he's going to town on this one. He's loving, he knows where I'm going with this one, right?
He's probably done that too.
He's probably done that. Did anybody just start answering the questions from the top before you got to the bottom where it said all you had to do is sign your name and turn it in? I was one of those. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm not in a boat by myself. She admitted it. All right, good. All right. But see, as a pattern, the inconsistent part of the system is when you're given instructions. Let's say, for example, turn this in by this date. Okay? I don't know what we're going to turn in. Let's just say we're gathering something as a congregation that we're going to take and we're going to donate, or we're going to send somewhere on this mission trip, and it's got to be here by this date, so we'll have time to organize it. And you are never following those instructions. You are showing your system is based upon poor priorities that are rooted in defiance. So I can't be inauthentic. I can't be inconsistent because my priorities are wrong, and my defiance is going to shine forth. My system will show that to everyone that's in that system. And then three, my system, if I am assessing my system, it cannot be indifferent. What's indifference? Say it again. Not the same. It's very different. All right. Well, if I feel indifferent, what is that? I don't care.
Indifference is when my wife asks me what color curtains I want.
Man, don't get me in trouble.
And I say, we have curtains? Like
do we even have curtains?
I have no opinion.
Okay, there we go.
In that regard.
So does your system show indifference to life, to love, or to faith? Now we're talking about boundaries, and we're talking about assessing those boundaries and those activities. We have to be authentic, we have to be consistent, and we have to care. So we cannot find those negatives within that assessment of that system.
And if we can't do that in our marriage and in our family, then where can we?
Nowhere. Because we've never defined ourselves. We've never defined where we're coming from. And most importantly, what we're going to talk about now here in just a moment, tonight, the rest of the time, we cannot produce anything from that system that we can have any hope to provide faith. If that system that we are producing in our families, in our homes, if it's not authentic, if it's not consistent, if it doesn't care, if it doesn't have a direction, if it doesn't show which way we're going to go, this is what our life is going to be. How can we expect to produce anything within any system of faith? The doctrine of Christ, the body of teaching of Jesus, He has given us that. But if we're not within that system, shining that as the way we're going to go, Mom and Dad, then all those little ones that are coming along, what are they going to follow? Whatever the loudest or brightest or shiniest or most popular at moment thing is at the moment. So it's something to consider as we move forward through this tonight, and as we look at what it means to really allow a system to have no voice. I want you to think about that. Well, if you don't have a voice in your system, in your family, what are you vulnerable to? Oh, okay, all right. Indifference, disaster. If you have no voice, you're not going to have any identity if you don't have a voice, because you don't know what you're saying or what you want to say. Oh, there's our word already, Gary.
Yeah, he's going to head of us.
You got ahead of us, he said. I have to wait. That means I have to wait. Hit the brakes and back up to what that means. Okay, all right. Sometimes the song can teach us you got to stand for something. You've got to have a voice. So if we find then within that system, and the last thing I'm going to say about these three things, if authenticity is an issue, okay, if consistency is an issue, if not caring and not having a voice is an issue, then we need to understand that within that system that we have created, we are breeding activity that leads to passive aggressiveness. So I ask you this, and I know we're only in the first half. I ask you this: can a Christian be passive aggressive and be faithful? This is yes, and this is no. What?
You know I have passive-aggressive tendencies.
Well, you're not perfect. Come on, y'all tell me. Can a Christian be passive-aggressive and be faithful? Because I believe I remember reading somewhere, you don't have to check me on this, that a Christian is supposed to let our yea be and our nay be. So it means I have to have a voice. I have to have a direction. I have to stand for something. But preacher, you know, people always call you preacher when they're ready to argue with you, right? Preacher, you're getting confused because we're supposed to love everybody. I do love everybody's soul. Don't you? Everybody's soul is important, so important that Jesus died for it. I love their soul. But to love them also means I have to be willing to tell them the truth. Now, I don't do it haughty, and I don't do it with pride, and I don't do it with arrogance. I'm not puffed up about it. But I have to get it said. And a system that cannot, then is a system that remains passive-aggressive and will fall by every outside influence that we talked about destroying last night. All right? Now,
It turns into then a power hierarchy or a power struggle, right?
it does.
Manipulating to get the
there's a
upper
word.
hand of the power. So, but all right. So what you're saying is that if I'm going to lead my family and I'm going to build boundaries that are healthy and promote the health of my family, then I'm going to need to show that I care actually about how our family is laid out, what it does, what it looks like, where we go. I care about what this family does.
Yes.
And I have to then be consistent, and it has to be authentic.
It's got to come from the heart.
Which gets into one of the things that you talked about last night, which was how much outside influence right?
Right.
Like, it can't just be that somebody else tells us this is what our family's going to do, because this is our family. And for it to actually have the proper boundaries, we have to set the proper boundaries. So it
Correct.
has to be that we care what this family does, and we're consistent in what this family does. And it's going to be us. It's going to be authentic.
Okay. The two have to come together. The two have to be unified. The husband and the wife, they have to be on the same page. How many of you have heard this phrase? You ready? I want a show of hands again. Divide and conquer. All right, it's a very common phrase, right? It's very real. Does the system allow a division? Not if the system is strong. And you were talking about that last night. Not if that union is strong. Not if that unified two have become one and are showing their strength. So what are we going to do?
Well, I think we need to talk a little bit about the practicality of boundaries. There's no way that, and we shouldn't tell you what boundaries your family should have.
No, not
but
at
we
all.
can go through some categories for you
Yes.
to think about of what boundaries we're going to set in these categories to accomplish what, right?
Exactly. All right, so if we're going to start meddling, I want to know something. What's our stop time?
We're going to go to 7:35.
7. Okay,
is
all
what,
right,
I'm-
all right.
is what I say.
All right, so at 7:34, we start hunting for the back door. Is that what we're going to do?
No, you got to be authentic.
Oh, I have to be real. Okay,
Yeah.
here we go. The first boundary thing, action, let's use that word. We think action, we think so many things, but let's use that. The first thing that a boundary has to do, what is it?
Protect from external threat.
Okay, everybody got that?
And this, I think, is probably where our minds go to first when we think about boundaries in the first place.
Because we
around
said
our family.
Yeah,
It's
we
the
said
protection
wall or
piece.
we said wall or a fence is when we said that first night.
Yeah, and so and in our world today, we have to think about digital boundaries, right?
Yes.
Because of the way that there's so much access to, or you say we have access to, but also it has access to us. Like
Yes.
it can get into our home through all manner of devices.
There's an open channel.
And so, right, I have boundaries in place to protect my family from physical threats,
Okay.
boundaries in place to protect my family from threats coming through digital, right? I think that's the easiest one to think about first.
Physical and spiritual threats have to be blocked. Is that a problem for us? I'd love to hear what your thoughts are here. Is that a problem for us to build boundaries that protect? What's the word that protects from external threat? It's 2 letters. What is it? Say it loud. No, right? Why is that a hard word? 3 or 4 of you mouthed it, but you didn't say it. Why is saying no difficult? My baby girl's here. She's fixing to turn 22. Whew. Don't look at me like that.
You're old.
I'm not worried about me. As they grow up, is it easy to say no? Now you're shaking your head no. Because every time you say no, they think you what? They think you don't love them. But what is no really showing? Protection. And when you want to protect, you're showing them that you love them. Right?
Wait, so you're saying part of the boundaries that protect from the outside world is not just me saying no to the outside world?
Correct.
It's me saying no within the family, and that is a part of the protection from,
Yes.
right?
So it has to be.
No, you can't be on social media yet. You're not old enough to handle that. Or no, like that's what you're talking about.
You can't have an iPhone at age 6. What are y'all laughing about? Y'all know I just got in trouble, right? Y'all know that. Because I put a number on that. Okay.
Yeah, well, we said we weren't going to specifically tell them what their boundaries had to be. we're just going to
Well, that's true.
categories.
That's
So that's just an illustration.
Oh, yeah, there we go. That's an
might-
example. Yeah, that's a pie in the sky.
All right. Before we move to the other three,
Okay.
because I think the other three are categorical shifts in
Okay.
a way.
This
Right.
is the main one. This is the big one.
So I want to draw your attention to a passage you're all familiar with, Ephesians 6 and verse 4. Fathers, and I think fathers there is applicable to the parental unit,
I don't have a problem with that.
right?
Even though it's the father's responsibility. Even though the buck stops with dad.
He says, provoke not your children to wrath. That doesn't mean that you can't make them mad by saying no. That's not
good.
what that means.
That's good, because I made her mad a lot.
But bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. So, nurture, bring them up in, you're nurturing them.
You're loving
you
them.
are admonishing them,
Ooh.
which maybe is a little bit more of the discipline and directive
Right.
piece, right? And it's of the Lord, so that's the structure in which it's done, right? Because you're using, it's got to be the Lord's,
Not mine.
right?
That's right.
But what I want to focus on is this phrase, bring them up. Bring them up. So that phrase means to rear up to maturity.
That's what it says.
So it's a developmental term, right?
Yes.
It is that the passage you used in Timothy previously, right? So one of the things, if I'm going to provide for my family, that I have to give thought to beforehand is their developmental needs, right?
Yes.
And it is my responsibility to bring them up, to develop them, to grow them to maturity.
So I cannot let them remain stagnant.
Correct. But what that also means is my boundaries can't just be to protect them,
No.
because just protection isn't growth, right? Just because let's say I plant a garden and I build a fence around it, but I never water it and tend it. Well, nothing's getting to it to eat it,
Right.
but it's still not growing
Still not
and
gonna grow.
developing and producing any fruit. So these other three categories of boundaries, in my mind, are, yes, there's protection, but there are some other things that boundaries do and are necessary for that are actually about growing my family, maturing my family, and it's me as well as the children.
It's not
Right?
fun to watch them bump their knees, right? It's not fun to watch them break bones or cut themselves here and there, right? But they've got to learn. So watch these next few. We've got about 8 minutes, maybe.
And we can, I never did correct that misspelling that you made on that slide.
I wasn't going to tell anybody. So here's next. What must a boundary do? If you see now the umbrella is under protect, the next thing that a boundary has to do is it has to teach coping. Why? What happens in life? What happens in life? Well, you fail. There's going to be boo-boos, right? There's going to be rocks. There's going to be knives, or you're going to get cuts. You're going to get bumps. You're going to get bruises. So you have to learn how to deal with that. But along with the coping with the bad things that happen, we have to teach them how to regulate their emotions. How do we feel when they come back from that bad bike wreck? How does that feel? How does it feel? You feel about that tall? You wish it never would have happened? Why, of course you do. Why, of course you do. Have they learned from it? I did. Did you? Yeah. We learned you could put 3 bricks and the plywood and you could jump the bike and you're fine. You get to 4, the front tire comes back too far and you're going to bust your tail on the backside. Right? We learned. We don't do it no more. Same thing with them, but we still feel bad. But we have to show them how we deal with bad things that happen. Are bad things going to stop just because they become adults? If anything, they're going to what? More and more and more. And so we have to show them how we deal with those things.
And when we use the word teach, it's not like we're talking about a curriculum or even that we're talking about we have to sit down and discuss emotions all the time. The way that I teach my kids to regulate their emotions is to regulate my emotions in their presence.
So you mean I have to model this behavior? I have to model my
Which
boundary?
is why we started the whole discussion with the boundary of defining me.
Of me, that's right. Of self. All right? What about as we promote the members' development within this boundary that you talked about just a moment ago?
So teach coping and emotional regulation and promote
development.
Yeah.
And what did you want to say about that development? Have you anything in mind
there? What do I not want to say about that? So we've just been teaching at Child Haven. We've been going through teen development, right? Because we're our house parents and our social workers are primarily dealing with teenage girls. Teenage girls are a whole different animal, right?
Shh. What were y'all like when y'all were teenagers? The ladies are nodding. They're not saying it, they're nodding, like the bobblehead dolls, and they're nodding. Okay, we'll leave it there.
But one of the things that we talked a lot about is that adolescence is this period where so many things happen in the brain, so many things happen in the body, and God has designed it as such.
That's right.
Right? For them to start pushing back. Right? And so during this time period, they become more interested in what their peers have to say and in peer relationships. And we don't like that, in part because have you met their peers? You know what I mean? But also because these are my babies.
But that goes back to your question a minute ago. We have to start when they become self-aware, probably more like age 3 than 5, but we can't wait till they're teenagers. Because when they're teenagers, when we were teenagers, what did we do with mom and dad? Right? My dad became the most ignorant man on the planet when I turned 13. When I turned 30, he became the wisest soul to ever live. Am I the only one in that boat? Okay, good. I got some guys that agree with that. Isn't that what happens when we're teenagers? So we have to begin early. All right, go ahead.
So I can't relate to my teenager the same way I did to them as a kid. So it's also pushing my development.
It's true.
My growth.
That's true. I have to keep growing. I cannot stop just because I get to a certain age. Isn't that the hard part? You're going to find out. It's coming for you, buddy. Y'all see, I get to get even now because mine is now through those teenage years, and he got to laugh the whole time. He's got 2 of them.
But back to the point.
Oh, okay.
What context, right? What environment do I want to create in which my family is going to grow? And what do I want that experience to have been when they hit adolescence and start pushing back? Right? That's what we're talking about. What is going to define the environment that they grow up in?
Don't they have to have the structure? Isn't it? Do I get to use the word now? I get to use the word now? We have to have structure. What was your word? Chaos. We have to have structure for this development that will defeat the chaos.
So protect, but promote, right? By teaching coping and emotional regulation, being developmental. So I'm not going to have all of the same boundaries when it comes to a 5-year-old as I am. I've got to recognize and promote growth, but I have to have a structure in place.
There has to be something in place.
And that's what is in Ephesians 4 when it says of the Lord, the nurture and admonition of the Lord. See, my job is not just to nurture and admonish my kids, because that could go in any number of directions. My job is to nurture and admonish them with a structure that the Lord provides.
that He's given us, that He's given us to have.
And things don't grow without a structure to direct their growth. I mean, there's some growth that can happen, but it's not directed. It's not intentional. It's not
How about proper growth?
proper.
Proper growth cannot happen without structure to grow within and opposition to make it strong.
And what do we see in families where there is a complete lack of boundaries and lack of structure? And it's chaos. Kids do not thrive in that chaos. They develop substance abuse addictions. They become promiscuous. They struggle with mental health problems.
All sorts of attachment disorders.
Because the structure has to be in place for them to learn how to interact socially,
How to attach to their relationship.
how to form an identity of who they are.
Yes, that's right. And the last one. You ready for the last one?
We just hinted at it, didn't we?
We did.
Yeah.
What is it when we model interaction? Where do we model interaction? I'm getting a bunch of blank. Where your kids see you? At home, okay? The first thing they're going to see, you're going to model how you treat your spouse. Husbands, how you treat your wife. Wife, how you treat your husband. They're going to see that. They're going to understand what love is by the way they watch you do it. Not say it, not talk about feeling it, but how you do love your spouse. They're going to watch. That's what you did. You're going to take a lot of your arguing tactics. Remember, we ended up last night because he was saying I used an animal and I was going to be in trouble. But our argument tactics, we don't usually develop those on our own. We usually develop those by what we see, by what we model. So as we model interaction, it starts at home. What's the next place that's more prominent than the home that they see you interact with other people? Where is it? Right here. When you come to worship. And you're with the church, right? Because the church is not the brick, the wood, and the mortar, and the paint. It's the people, right? And so when you're interacting within the church, where is a better place for them to see you model behavior and to see other Christians model behavior than right here? Now,
and that goes back to your authenticity piece as
absolutely,
well.
absolutely.
Because they will learn very quickly if when I'm here, I'm fake with you, right? Oh, yeah. And then at home, I'm bitter and angry and resentful.
Yes. How do they know what's right? How do they know what's real? They don't.
And so also what you're saying is that by the time my kids get to teens, they need to have learned and developed social interaction skills, because at the teen point is when they push away from me and they start
practicing their own.
Practicing those outside of.
Yes.
And so, well, that can be a disaster if we didn't develop, socialize.
That's it.
Prior.
That's it.
Okay. All right. That's a lot of stuff. Tomorrow, we are going to carry that over to the church, in our ministry. How do we then come together and set some boundaries with how we want to define ourselves to the world and in the community, or how does the Lord define us in our community and so forth, and so that we can be a healthy body, right, as we minister to others.
And so if you thought that the first night in us talking about the boundary of yourself, or the second night in talking about the boundary of your marriage, or if tonight was particularly sharp about the boundary of your family, tomorrow night you might want to not have your heart on your sleeve, because we are the church, and we are talking to those that we love. We are talking to those that matter and those that love us and that we matter to. We're not going to pull any punches. because by now we have the foundation laid. And we're going to use Scripture and make it plain.
All right. If you'll be back in here at 10 till.
Thank you for your attention.
If you want to be back.